phoned my sister. I'm stuck in the barn and there's a big cat outside. Can you come and do something? And she laughed at me.
I just froze. Didn't want to move because I didn't want it coming towards me or anything, something like that. You think, where the hell has that come from?
Welcome to Big Cat Conversations. We speak directly to people who've encountered one of Britain's big cats. We also discuss the bigger picture. I'm Rick Minter, and thanks for joining me. Welcome to episode 84 of Big Cat Conversations. We're coming to you with this one around mid-October 2022. Back in episode 40, we had a memorable edition based on events in Derbyshire, and that was mainly about a big cat along a railway line. Hopefully this is another key episode from Derbyshire, and this time part of the action is with stone walls being the route of a big cat. And while you're listening to this one, it might be worth looking at the references and links page of the Big Cat Conversations website under episode 84, because there we have put some thermal camera images taken by Don, our guest. We'll be hearing from Don about how he got that footage in his local area of Derbyshire and what he makes of the events he's been watching and filming. So Don, welcome along. First of all, thanks so much for sharing the footage and great to have you on the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Rick. Thank you very much for having me.
Great stuff, Don. I know we're going to mainly spend time discussing the thermal camera images and have you explaining what was going on. But before that, you got into the subject because you had a sighting many years ago in Derbyshire. Can you start off by telling us all about that one, please?
Well, that's a long time ago now, but yes, I will. The thing is, I'd heard about the Beast of Exmoor, Surrey Puma and things like that in the newspapers on TV. When I'd heard about something happening up here in Derbyshire, and it was in different papers all through the county, I think, I decided to go up and have a look what was happening. And apparently this cat had been causing problems to the farms up and down in the place Ollerset Moor. I decided to go up there. And when I arrived at Ollerset Moor, there was a line of policemen, and some of them had rifles. They closed the moor so they wouldn't let me on. And they said, we've seen nothing, and they were making a joke of it, more or less. Anyway, I went home. A few days later, they opened the moor again. So I went with a friend and my son, and we went to have a look with it. We took a video camera, which was at the time a big clunky thing where you put the cassettes in the side. We went up on the moor, but we didn't see any cats. But what we came across was a sheep, and it was lying on its side, and it had this absolute gaping hole in it, red raw. It looked like something had been munching on it, taking big chunks out. A few weeks later, I went up onto the moor again, and this time from a place called Chinley. It's a steep climb up from Chinley to the top of this Chinley churn, it's called, which is part of the moor. It was an old quarry, and where it's been quarried, it's just an haven for animals. It's got so many little caves. But besides that, there was about 4 mines into the side of the hillside. I believe now they've been closed off. I went up onto the topside, got something to eat and drink with me, so I spent a few hours up there looking, saw nothing. But the view, you can see Kinderscout, Brown Knoll, South Head, towards Castleton and Edale. And
key landmarks of the Peak District.
Yeah, and it was absolutely beautiful day. I was making my way home and decided to finish off the rest of my coffee in the flask. So I sat down, looking down about 80 metres away down the slope, pile of rock on one side, pile of rock on the other side, and in between the two walked a black leopard. I was amazed. I strode across about 20 feet, I would say, in between these two sets of rocks. It never looked up. It just sauntered across. It looked big shoulders, It looked ever such a strong beast. I was absolutely taken aback. And it was only later it struck me it could have been up the slope in seconds and at me if it wanted to. But he never even looked. Anyway, that was really the only time up to lately I had seen a cat. However,
What was the date of that, Don? What year would that have been?
that would have been 1989 when the thing had come out in the newspapers. And it was later on, after the police had all died down and things like that, that's when I started going up, and then I found it.
Isn't that interesting, Don, that was local media reporting that never got national? You know, in the 80s, there was Beast of Bodmin that was getting national attention. Meanwhile, that was going on in Derbyshire, and the local papers were reporting it, the police were on the case, yet it never really got wider attention.
No, it didn't. It had caused some damage to the farms as well. There was a few lambs killed. As you said, it's surprising why it didn't get publicised. And they set a fuse going in me, that's the trouble. And from then, I was trying to find out when I could see another one, if you like.
How did it feel? You'd almost gone up there to see it, and it sort of appeared on your way down. That must have been quite a surreal experience.
Yeah, I was over the moon, I think, at the time. I didn't tell anybody. I didn't report it. I thought, well, the police know it's up here, and they're not bothered. They've gone off watch, if you like. If they're not bothered, why should I tell them? I just thought, well, carry on. That's what I did.
You were telling me that if you look at local media reports and websites, that there's been credible reports and sightings going on for 32 years in that general area of Derbyshire.
I believe so, yes. Before all that, the scrap dealer in Sheffield had let 2 pumas and a black leopard free on the moor, I think, between Kinderscout and Bleaklow. There's a long stretch of mountain road, if you like. It's very bleak up there. And apparently pulled up his van and opened the door and off they went, So I don't know what happened to those guys. No idea.
This all ties in with Billy's encounter that we heard about, the railway line inspector, on episode 40, because you mentioned Chinley. Well, he mentioned Chinley because there's a depot, isn't there? That was part of his route.
Yes. I could follow Billy's talk all the way, from when he started right through to Edale Station. I could follow every step of his way where he went.
Yeah, and it tied in with, you spoke to a farmer who owned land alongside the railway line, is that right?
Yes, Billy was on the track heading towards Sheffield. From Edale, the next station back is Chinley, and the next station back from that is New Mills. In between Chinley and New Mills, I heard about this farmer who had seen a big cat. So I went up and had a word with her. It was a farmer's wife. I think the farmer had passed away then, but she lived there with her son and family. This is about 1989-ish time, and she decided to go down to look at some lambs which had been born in the field near the railway line, which we're talking about. She got down there and there was a gate, and she just leaned on the gate for a minute or two. And she couldn't believe her eyes because it was a big black cat walking up the field. It wasn't coming directly at her at that time. It was more like in parallel to where she was looking. However, it suddenly must have sensed her there or something, because it suddenly turned in its tracks and started walking towards her. She said it was probably the size of a Labrador or something like that, and black. She said how dark, how really black it was. She decided that it was worrying her, so she stood on the second bar up, say, of the gate, put her arms up in the air and shouted at it to go away. The cat actually stopped in its tracks, looked at her, and then turned and carried on the route it was on. She was astounded a short time later because there was a group of guys in boiler suits, she said, with Wellingtons on, carrying rifles. and they walked in a line following where the cat had gone. Well, how they knew where the cat was or anything, I've no idea. It may have all tied in with the line of policemen as well, so I have no idea. But apparently it had killed quite a lot of lambs on their land. They'd been in a circle, these lambs, and they'd all had the throats punctured.
Isn't that interesting, though, that it's the same adjacent to where Billy's route was, and a generation later, in Big Cat's times, he sees one, he experiences one along that line.
Yeah.
So it does tally, doesn't it?
It's not that far from that farm to Edale itself.
Yeah, and so then we may as well fast forward because we've got a lot to talk about with the thermal camera experience. So what got you interested in the thermal camera work was hearing Aid and his wife on the Nottinghamshire episode back in episode 68, and then seeing the footage that Aid took on the website. In fact, you did your own work on Aid's videos because you did close-up, cropped, still pictures from it. What did you make of all of that?
I thought that episode of Aid's and Jane's cat, well, it just set me going. I didn't know what thermal cameras were at that time. When I saw the footage he'd got, and then the fact that Aid had run after this, what turned out to me to be a leopard. But wow. Wow. I don't know, he must have some nerve to do that.
Well, he's ex-military, isn't he, of course?
I was absolutely blown away by it, and it started to eat into me, and I thought, I've got to get a thermal camera. And I thought, what is a thermal camera? Where do you get a thermal camera from? So I had to start looking on the web. It's what price, really, you're prepared to pay, I think it comes down to.
You ended up getting a pulsar similar to Aid's, basically, didn't you?
I'm not saying better, but it was a different model. I got an Alien 2 XQ38F.
You bought it to hopefully film a big cat, although you probably thought that was a bit of a long shot. So tell us, before we get on to the cat footage, tell us about just filming other wildlife.
I have some friends who have a field and a wood, a small wood. They'd let me on the land, and it was great because there was plenty of badgers there and foxes, some deer. It was great to be able to just stand in the middle of the field and watch all these. I've had badgers coming up within a few feet of me, virtually rubbing into my leg. But holding things steady, and it wasn't until lately that I found the way around it.
You need fairly dry air, don't you? If it's a misty night or a drizzly night, it's not worth bothering about, is that right?
It's very difficult. If it starts to rain is a different temperature. It does impede the view. When you're looking at something, you're not seeing a photograph, you're seeing the thermal image of that thing, what you're looking at. And if something cold, say, gets in the way of it, then it distorts everything, or makes things harder to see. Yeah, so mist, we get a lot of mist up here, because filming is probably about 1,000 foot up, and even in summer, and we've had such a dry summer. Even then, there's a dew at certain times of the evening, and it just comes down and condenses on your lens.
But in terms of stabilising, it's this monopod, and we've used that for Word of the Week that you've suggested. So rather than a tripod with 3 legs, it's a monopod, a full-length stand that people use for different scopes. So tell us about the monopod and what that does.
As far as I'm concerned, it's far better than a tripod for when you're moving about. A tripod's great, you can set it on the ground, but if you're walking a bit and moving, you need something there where you can touch the ground and hold the camera a bit more steady. Massive difference when I finally got around to getting it.
The final thing before we get on to filming the cat was you've been telling me about the cattle, because we see cattle and livestock on some of the footage that you get, and you were mentioning that you get an enlarged thermal signature from a big animal like a cow. So tell us about that.
Yeah, cattle, especially if you're close to them, they're throwing heat up like nobody's business. It's absolutely pouring off them. Looking through with a thermal camera, and which detects heat, So you may be on, say, the left side, and you pan over the top of the cattle, and they suddenly hit a bank of heat, which fades the background out pretty much. It does alter the image what you get in the camera when you do that. Also, when you're looking at them in the field, especially they can be 100, 200 yards away or meters away, when they stood up, it's not so bad, but when they lie down and they're chewing the cud, they seem to swell up. The amount of heat coming off is fantastic. The other thing is, hares, when they come out in the evening, a lot of time they like to get some exercise and they race up and down the fields like crazy. And as they start off, they're small. And they get halfway down the field, and because of the heat coming off them, they suddenly go, woo, quite big. And then they'll stop, and within a second or two, the heat's gone off them and they shrink again.
So these are hares rather than rabbits, are they?
Yeah, we don't get a lot of rabbits in this part of the moor.
Good stuff. Okay, well, let's get on to the different sightings of cat or cats that you've had. You think you've had up to 20. Tell us how it started, and because you were going out at dusk regularly from April and through the summer, weren't you? And tell us when you first realised that a blob in the distance was actually possibly a cat, and then what you did to clarify that and go out again and film it more clearly as a cat.
About 400 metres away from this wall, you got a good view, a field of view. I could see foxes, and in fact, I watched one fox a long way off, and then it jumped over a wall and eventually came quite close, so I whistled it in, and it came within feet of me before it realised what was happening. Then I noticed there was one other animal, blob if you like, which seemed a bit bigger than blob. It was acting in a different way. It jumped on these walls, and then it would be ferreting around in trees and things like that. I worked my way, tried to get nearer, so I got about 200 yards away. Then it was further up on the moor, and I could only see blobs. But one of my favourite videos is that I pulled up, and it was a Saturday evening, I think. I got my friend Chris with me in the car, and he was looking at the image on my phone, because you can send it via Wi-Fi from your camera to the phone as well. He noticed that there was a roe deer, and then in the background I could see a blob. I'd got it in white, actually, hot white. I could see this blob, but the blob wasn't really getting any bigger. It was like ferreting around in the grass, just looking for stuff, I think. At one point, the wind was blowing towards us, and I think the roe deer must have got the scent, because the next thing is it trotted over to some long grass and lay down, really down in the grass. And the blob got a bit nearer, and then eventually the blob turned into a cylinder and came down the hillside and disappeared. A bit later on, when it had gone, the roe deer got up and walked over the moor, and I'm pretty sure another roe deer joined it, and possibly another one as well. It was certainly frightened of that blob on the hillside.
That made you suspicious?
I was very suspicious of that, yeah. It was only a few days after that, 14th of June, when I first saw and filmed the first cat on the wall. I've seen foxes on the wall many times. I've seen the badger on the wall. I've seen stoats and weasels on the wall. And the hares, they use that as party time. You know, this can go up there in 3 or 4 at a time. I just rolled up in the car, and as I was getting out of the car, I turned the pulsar on, which is very quick to start up. By the time I got out of the car, closed the door, I got to the gate, and it was twilight, it was dark. You couldn't see anything. And I thought I'd just focus on that wall, because it's important to focus and get things as sharp as possible. I was absolutely bowled over because there was something quite large on the wall. I hadn't a clue what it was at first. I thought it was a fox. I was convinced it was a fox. Anyway, it started moving, so I started whistling it, sort of attitude. Eventually it looked over and just disdain sort of thing I could see.
What distance would it have been away?
150 yards. I measured it on Google. just over 150 metres round. They're working metres. It was moving up the wall, and I started shouting to it, "Come here, I'm here, come and get me." Again, it turned and looked, sort of thing, but then carried on. It was so interesting watching it go up the wall out. It'd be hunting. It was hunting and looking down in the field on the opposite side of that wall from me. And then now and again it would look on this side of the wall. And now and again its little paw, or big paw, would come down and fiddle about, because the dry stone walls are absolutely full of mice at some times of the year. The mice go in there, and that's why the stoats and weasels like going up on the walls as well. The grass was, it must be 5 foot high, 4 foot high in the field at the time, so you couldn't get the scale of the cat, as it turned out to be, on the wall. But it was certainly hunting, and it went all the way up the wall sometimes, and now and again it would do a scent mark on the wall. Then it would be off again and looking over the other side, looking down this side. Eventually it got so far up on the wall and it dived off into the opposite field because it must have seen something worthwhile. Not long after, it came back, but I had lost it, and I'm zooming around with my camera trying to find, where's it gone? It came up and it came back and then walked along, and it disappeared. It looks like it's going into a bush, into a tree, but it isn't, because that tree's about 200 yards further back than the wall. It had jumped off the wall again and disappeared. As it turns out, in the field beyond, the farmer is very good. He leaves a margin all the way down. It was a margin of about 12 foot, I would say, of long grass when they'd cut it. So it was absolutely full of long grass and everything what lives in it, from hares to rodents and probably deer. There are deer up there. They can't walk on the wall because going through the field with such long grass, they see nothing. The hares go up on the wall to keep an eye out for the foxes, and the fox go on the wall so they can see for rodents and hares, and the cat goes on the wall so it can see everybody.
Incredible stroke of luck for you, Don, because you hadn't gone there filming because of that, but you worked out that was what was happening. So it gives you a raised view, doesn't it? I mean, the animals there are perched for you to get a better view of, and you get a good profile, which and a raised profile, which you can see more clearly. So the wall is doing you so many favours just by pure luck that you happen to be in the right time and going out at dusk regularly, and then sussing it all out and working it out that that's what the function of that wall was for the different creatures.
Indeed. It could have been that the cat had been on the wall many times before, but I'd been staring more to the right to where more was, looking for the foxes. And yeah, it was just luck. It was plain luck.
It was always at whatever time sort of mid-dusk was, when it's starting to get the more darker side of dusk. This was when the action happened all through the summer months. Is that right?
It did. That was the 14th of June when I first saw it. And the next one was on the 21st of June. That was the second cat. I had trouble that night. I could not get my camera to work. It's my fault, not Pulsar's fault. I could only get, if it went on black, it was black. Everything was black and I couldn't. Anyway, I went on hot white, and that was just a bit too, well, it was drowning everything in white. I managed to get it a bit better, and even so, the cat is hot white, but the background is too white. It's just one of those learning curves. I hadn't learned how to work the camera properly at that point.
We're talking about the colour palettes. Out of hot white or black, which do you prefer at long distance on the thermal signature? If it's real distance, then black is better, isn't it? I've noticed. I mean, I would say, personally.
I think white still gives better detail. Just on the evening, how the light is affecting, because you've still got light from the sky, and no matter how dark it is, there's something there. The moon may be up, or things like that, or moisture in the air might be making a big difference.
One of the bits of footage of the wall walking incidents was taken by a friend of yours, because you decided to take a friend who you knew for many years, and you knew that he was a skeptic, but you wanted to see if he could see it himself and film it himself. And the cat obliged as it came out that night, and he did instantly change his view. Can you tell us about that? And we'll have that bit of footage on the website for people to see.
Andy, he was actually taking the photograph that night. Very clever. He picked it up in minutes, whereas it's taken me a long time. He was panning, up and down the field sort of thing. We hadn't seen anything, and then he came back to the wall, and there it was. It must have come up from the other side of the field. I thought he did quite a good job, because it was the first time he'd had a go with it. He was holding the camera pretty well. He said, "I can't believe it. I can't believe this." Afterwards, when it had gone, he said, "I'm gobsmacked." I would say believed at that point.
I mean, he knew that you'd been claiming to see it, hadn't you? So he went out,
yeah.
But he still went out that night as a skeptic, but came back as somebody then wanting to protect it and not tell anybody where the location was. He was instantly transformed, wasn't he?
Yes, indeed. Certainly was. He was blown away by it.
That is the good thing about the wall. It just gives you that profile for you to judge the animal against. And of course, we know from Aid's footage that he got on the Nottinghamshire episode that the tail, unfortunately, doesn't often register much as a thermal image, does it? Because it's obviously thinner and it doesn't carry so much heat. So that is a bit of a frustration. But there's a few times when we see the tail. But what was it when you were looking for the cat versus a badger versus a fox versus a deer? What was it that would make you think that is the cat I'm watching and not a different mammal?
The form of it, definitely, but it was the size. It looked so much bigger. I see the foxes about the distance away, and they look small. The hares are, well, some of the hares are quite massive up there, but having said that, they still don't look that big. But this looked out of place. First thought, what's a donkey doing on the wall? And it looked out of place. It was big.
And you started calling it a cylinder, didn't you?
Well, that's on the hillside. You don't get any detail. It's either a blob or a cylinder at one point.
I guess a badger is a cylinder, but it's not as big, and it doesn't sort of stand out so much in the tall grass.
The badgers are two-tone because they've got so much insulation around the body that the head looks more, say, white, and the back grey. The same with the sheep. There'll be big white head and a grey back, and they virtually disappear because it's so insulated you can hardly see them at times.
Yeah, so you get that experience of knowing what you're looking for.
Yes, just looked out of place.
Through the summer, at times, people would be going along past you. I know it's a very quiet corner of Derbyshire where this was, but sometimes people would drive past. People would wonder what you were doing, and obviously you didn't want to let on. What excuses did you use to throw people off the case?
Quite truthfully, you just say, I'm looking for a barn owl. And, foxes. I was telling the truth. They were interested. I would show people sometimes. They'd come and have a look through it, and I'd point them over the field, and they would be very happy.
That is good that you didn't have to tell an outright lie. But otherwise, you might have been very suspicious and local people would have got talking. And because the last thing you want is for people to be on the case and concerned and follow up what you're doing. Because we were saying the amount of times you were seeing it, because you were seeing it for many minutes sometimes, weren't you? And if you were out with firearms at that distance, you would have been able to dispatch it, wouldn't you, if you were minded to? But obviously we're not minded to, we're not encouraging that. But it was, somebody could go there and shoot it, or could have done.
I think with a rifle, you'd have been hard-pressed because firing a rifle there, the bullet's got to land somewhere, and any responsible sportsman, if you like, with a rifle would not shoot in that area because of the backstop isn't there for it.
It's too open, you mean? It's too extensive and open?
Well, yes, the bullet travels a long way. They can go a mile or so, you see. So, and that to drop down at such a place, and it's surrounded more or less anywhere. It could hit another farmhouse or a passing car. There's roads around, so firing a weapon within so near a road or something is illegal anyway. With a shotgun, that would have been different, but he couldn't have shot it at that distance. 150 metres would have been too far for a shotgun. It is feasible, but who knows? People are irresponsible, aren't they? So
let's move on to the times when you filmed it off the wall in the pasture. The examples are going to be on the website for people to see. And again, several minutes at a time. So, and again, this was happening quite regularly through dusk, through the summer. It seems to be foraging in the pasture for small prey. Is that right?
yes, it certainly was. I got 7 videos altogether of it in that area, just short of 2 hours of video time. The 4th one was when I'd been to Scotland for a week. When I came back, the farmer had cut grass in that field. You could get a good idea of the height of the wall, which is on the slope is about 48 inches, and just on the bottom section is about 52, 53 inches. And at the top end, it is less, it's about 38. I've been up and down, measured it so many times. It was interesting that walking in the field, because on the 4th one, by the time I noticed the cat, it was in the field. And the farmer who owned that field had been in and cut the grass, but he'd also cut it only a foot away from the wall, leaving high grass. So this cat was sat with its back to me, and it was just watching anything in that space, that foot, and obviously taking it out. You can see that it's a big cat by the way it moves, but it was laid down most of the time and creeping along because it didn't want to frighten anything. The next video I took, that one was in 30th of July, the 4th one, and the 5th one was on the 1st of August, so a few days later. And that one came in on the wall, so you can see again a scale of the wall, roughly 52 inches, measure with that, and you can tell by the length of the cat. That came in and jumped down, first of all, into the other side of the field. A few minutes later, it came up and walked a few more feet and then jumped into this side of the field and seemed to disappear. But what you've got to realise that fields are not like bowling greens. They're full of hollows and dips and hills and raised bits. So jump down and disappear, and cats can disappear at the best of times. But this suddenly came out again, and it's quite long. It's not a high cat. I put it about 22 inches high and about 43 inches long or something like that. That's his body, not counting its tail. That then went foraging in the field, probably after little rodents. Leverets at that time were pretty small. Now they're getting quite large, but could have been after leverets as well. Yeah, there's tons of mice, absolutely stacks. And then a few days later, 3rd of August, I got the 6th one, and that came on the wall, and I shot that in hot white. And he came down quite a few metres on the wall and then jumped off into the field. Again, disappears for a few minutes and then comes back. Then he came walking across the field. You can see him in front of the gap. There's a gap in the wall broken at one point, and it's about 72 inches at one point, but there's a fence post up, and from the fence post to the other side is about 50 inches, something like that. So you can gauge it against that as well. And then he just goes all up and down the field, up and down the field. Eventually jumps over the wall again and goes into the next field, I presume, and does the same kind of thing.
So lucky that the wall itself, has got all this advantage for your filming, and it gives you the reference point by the posts in it, the scale of it, and the gaps in it. You've got all those different ways of comparing it to the animal that you need to scale. You've done several sort of annotated still pictures with the cat image on, with the justification of the scaling. And we'll select the best couple of those and put them on the website so people can see. And I think one of them is actually in the gap in the wall, isn't it? There's a dip of a gap in the wall, and that's one of the best ones.
Yeah.
So we'll include that one.
When you're measuring an animal from the rump to the nose, you go over the top of its back and then over its head and down to its nose, because the cat is walking along the wall. It doesn't want to fall off. So it's looking down. It's looking down for balance, but it's also looking down for food. It's hunting. Its head is looking downwards nearly all the time because of that reason. The length of the cat is nearly the height of the wall if you do that measurement.
Yeah, so it's easily in the right zone for something like a black leopard or a mountain lion, small, medium scale, and it can easily predate a deer. If it can kill a deer, then, it's in the right kind of scale for what we're interested in.
Oh, I'm sure it could. If you look at a coffee table, which is 4 foot long, and you imagine that's a cat, yes, it would to kill you.
Isn't it interesting that we have this image of them as the ambush predator prioritizing deer, and yet every night, that you filmed it starts its routine by spending many, many minutes methodically foraging through the long grass and then the shorter grass when it's cut for these nutritious snacks. I guess it knows it's guaranteed to get some good nutritious food.
It could well be that, or surely it's probably tasty. It's like people eat sweets in between or things like that.
And peanuts sort of thing.
Peanuts and that kind of thing. But it could also be that they've fed on a deer somewhere, they've got it, but they just want a bit of entertainment.
What I think your footage shows of when it's foraging, although it's going slowly, the amount of twisting and turning and, as you say, the field is sort of pockmarked with holes and undulations. So it does look, I was calling it like the shapeshifter. It would suddenly contort itself and go small and then unfold its body and look really long. And you were calling it the concertina. But isn't it interesting how it varies even as it's walking?
It can just go to nothing and then spread out. It looks really long, and then sometimes it's not long.
When that was happening, Don, what were your emotions and the balance of emotions between sort of wondering at this, big animal before you that you'd really been desperately trying to film and see again for many years, if you like, but also were you concentrating on just getting good footage because you knew you were in the moment and you had to use the technology for the best advantage? What was the balance of emotions in all of that time?
I was doing my best to hold it steady so we could see what it was when I got back. Because you're looking through, and it's a good picture when you're looking through, but even so, you're missing details because you're trying to balance.
Yeah, but emotionally, how was it? I mean, I know there were many, many minutes of it, as you said, total of 2 hours when it was in the pasture, if you added up the different events. But did it become more of a routine procedure, or were you always thinking, wow, I'm filming, a great big giant cat that's been a major interest of mine for years?
Again, you see, I wasn't looking at it, eyeballing it. I was looking through a lens, and I was seeing a heat image, and I don't think the fact that it was a big cat hit me properly at times. It was like a cartoon, if you like.
So it's more abstract in a way.
It seemed very abstract at the time. There was times when it seemed to move towards me, and I thought, oh dear, should I move? But there was just times like that. I think it was in between the first one and the second one. Was filming nothing in particular, just spotting. And I heard a real growl behind me of something. I mean, the nearest one I can get, it was Frank Tunbridge did it on your episode 4. He made this growling noise. And that put wind at me, that did. The cat hadn't shown up that night, but it may have been closer to me than I thought.
You were always next to the car, though, weren't you, in all these situations?
Well, yes, at that time. Since then, I've farmers give me permission to drive onto a field. I sometimes walk from there, be more vulnerable if you like. But I've never seen it close up yet, but I'm hoping to.
So a lot of times people would say, oh, you should do this, Don. But of course, there are different constraints practically on the ground and in terms of land ownership permission as well.
They like pocket handkerchiefs all over the place. A farmer will own that field, but he lives over there, miles away, and you don't know who owns what. Some places I'd love to put cameras on and what have you, but I can't get to find out who owns the land.
We should say that you were given permission to put trail cameras along a section of the wall, and you told the farmer this was for wildlife filming, which is, again, true. You didn't want to give away the fact there was potential big cat filming, but none of those trail cameras have delivered so far, which is very frustrating because, we're not seeing it up close. We're seeing it in the sort of middle distance. That remains a frustration, but you're still on the case.
Trail cameras drive me nuts, to be honest.
Join the club.
The first few ones of it walking down the wall, I'd got no permission, you see, but I think the third one, I had a couple on the wall, but we had a period where the grass was very high. It was virtually hanging over the wall on either side of the wall, and it was very windy. So I put the cameras on the posts looking down the wall, if you like, so I could hopefully see it walking up the wall. Anyway, I waited quite late in the day because it was long nights, and I waited and stuck them on the wall, but the wind was blowing that much, and you know what happens when you put the camera where there's pieces of grass blowing in front. And the first time I was using video as well rather than still shots. By the time the night came and the cat was on the wall, I'd run out of batteries.
The video just winds down the battery, and we've had that discussion with other guests on the podcast, and of course video is what you really want. Close-up video footage from a trail camera would be wonderful, but it's no good if the battery's wound down. So if you have it on a photo burst mode, there's more chance that the battery life will last a fair bit longer.
But that actually happened as well. You recommended a burst, and I did that, and I got about 9,000 shots in no time at all.
It has been a very volatile, windy summer, hasn't it, there and elsewhere, and it does wind down the trail cameras, unfortunately. But, there's still a chance. You've still got cameras out, haven't you, in different places, in clusters, and there's still a chance that you could film it.
The daft thing is the video, the last one, where it took fright. The cameras were on the wall, and I was convinced I was going to get it, but video 4, where the cat was sat looking at the wall, and that was at the top end, it was about 200 yards away, meters. I put all the video cameras down at the bottom end of the wall. Didn't catch any that night, and then I put them all facing at an angle, so it was looking down close to the wall, because that's where the cat had been feeding. The next thing is, the cat is in the field, and the cameras are not pointing in the field. I've just been very unlucky with everywhere.
I've always said a lot of this on getting our evidence is a numbers game. That includes trail cameras as well, and you just need as many trail cameras as you can throw at the challenge, and you've had between sort of 8 and 10, and really you'd need 20, 30, 40, I think, to cover your options in different angles, different locations. And of course, we're talking about this cat without even knowing what colour it is, whether it's a black leopard or a mountain lion. If you had to put money on it, what do you think it is, Don?
I think it's a leopard type cat. I don't know exactly what. Humans also moved into the area because last week I was in the field, and I've heard vixens calling many a time, and they don't usually start till November normally. Behind me, there was such a scream. I thought a woman was being murdered. The volume was terrific. That was like a knife going in me. Oh dear, what's that?
So the woman in distress, mountain lion in heat sort of call.
I have been listening on YouTube again, and I've came across one what did sound like that, a mountain lion, but I wouldn't like to put money on whether it was or whether it was a very active fox. I don't know. I really don't know. It was quite a scary noise, that one. I've heard fox many a times, but also that growl, which I heard.
In terms of the images, I know that you have this very good technique where you isolate some footage, get a still from it and zoom in, and it helps you see the profile of it. And you've done that, and we'll put this on the website. You've done one of those with your cat, and you've actually compared it with a very similar one from AIDS footage from Nottinghamshire, and you can see how similar they are. And you can see the sort of rounded ears if we've got the profile right and not distorted on that. So I think those are compelling images I'd recommend that listeners have a look at. So what did you make of that when you put those two together, AIDS and yours?
Well, yeah, I did a few. One looked pretty similar, actually, very cat-like, the profile of both of them. I mean, AIDS, in my opinion, was certainly a leopard. There was no question about that. I think I went through AIDS frame by frame on my computer, and I could follow it. I could see it. It was even catching things and eating things. And the one that I've been watching, the profile is very, very similar to AIDS, and the size of the head compared to the body is more leopard-like. A puma is a pretty small head in comparison to the body.
In terms of all the reports of sightings in your local area of Derbyshire over the years, they've been mainly black, haven't they, which would suggest leopard?
Everybody's talked about black.
In fact, you were saying to me you were getting frustrated that you couldn't clarify its colour because the thermal camera doesn't allow you to do that. But you were thinking about taking a big sort of torch spotlight out with you and turning that on if it was in range, just briefly, so you would see the colour. And I was saying, yeah, good idea, but be careful there's nobody driving past or walking past at the time because they'll know what you're up to. But that, of course, that remains to be done, doesn't it, really? But it is a good idea.
Actually, when I go into the field and the fox comes up to me, within a few feet, I can shine a torch at it and it doesn't really bother.
Can we just hear about one of the most compelling bits of footage, which we'll include on the website for people to see? And this is where it's coming closer to you, albeit it's still in the middle distance. But it looks up and then it bolts away. So that's a great bit of footage because we can see the behaviour and we see the fast movement away. What happened there then?
That was my fault. I just got the monopod. This one has got a footrest at the bottom which you can pull down and put your foot on it, and then using a little handle at the side, turn the camera. And it's very good if you're in a static position. So I was moving the camera and the monopod together. I turned the monopod and it hit against the gate and it went plink, just that, and it stopped.
It heard that from that distance?
It was nearer than you'd think, 80 metres.
But it looked up at you instantly on that noise, did it?
Yeah, quiet night. Sound travels at night like that, it really does. So it was off.
Yeah, although it's frustrating, Don, it's still very interesting to see that behaviour, isn't it? To see it, how quickly it bolts away.
Yeah, I've seen the cat approaching and it just bypasses cattle, calves and sheep and lambs.
And they don't react either?
No, and I've asked the farmers, and other people who live in that area, and there's nobody's know anything about any cattle being killed or sheep.
On that night, the night when it bounded away because it heard the noise of the monopod being jolted on the ground, just before then it had a good look at a hare that turns up, and we're including that one. This hare sort of bounds into view halfway through the bit of footage, and then it stops and the cat looks at it and it bounds over the wall. Is that what's going on there? The
hares know when the cat's coming, they can hear it, but it's black. They can't see don't think they can see the cat, and the cat's not interested in them. It's more interested in picking these little tidbits up out of the grass, You have to be really close to snaffle a hare because they can move so fast.
But the hare does seem to stop and notice the cat from what seems to be going on in that bit of clip.
Oh, yes, they can hear it, I'm sure. The long ears, they can hear it. And then the wind changes. I think this cat smelled the hare at one time, and, the wind was in the right direction. It made a move towards the hare, and I think it just, I'm out of here, gone. The sad bit is me messing around with the camera. It'd be going down in white, hot white, and I suddenly change into black just to jump up on the wall, things like that. It's a learning curve.
But I think we have to congratulate you for getting, enough good, decent footage, albeit middle-distant footage. I know that you and I have been discussing how to get better footage and, the use of the trail cameras and better quality thermal camera, but the cost of that, of course, is something to consider. But the other thing is we've been thinking about is a thermal drone to fly over. You've got to be very careful about how you use them and the regulations and not spooking and stressing out animals. It is an open, expansive bit of landscape. So thermal drone on a sort of clear evening, if the cat was there when you had the drone ready, it would probably do the business, wouldn't it?
Quite possibly, yes, I would think so, yeah.
Because I was asking Owen, who helps with these podcasts on the sound, because he's a sound specialist, but he's also a half-decent drone pilot. He's got a bit of experience occasionally flying them. And I was saying to him, because we did think about coming to visit you and hiring one, and I said, Owen, have we got a chance? And he said, yeah, if you can get close enough to it, which you might well do if it was in the pasture, walking up and down the wall, and you'd have the drone ready. But of course, all of those things have got to be right. You've got to have the circumstances set up, and it's frustrating because you need the technology and you need the situation and you need the cat to turn up that evening. You need the weather to be good that evening. It would have a chance because there's not woodland cover there. So people say about how we don't get the evidence and the footage that we should do for these cats. But all of this has cost you, Don, I'm guessing, £3,000 if you look at the different trail cameras and you look at the thermal camera and your time and effort. It's taken you a lot. It's basically half your summer evenings have gone doing this, although you've enjoyed it, of course, but you've spent £3,000 plus, and we still only got middle distance footage, but it just shows you what kind of logistics and expense that it needs.
Indeed, yes, expense. I mean, some of the cameras they have now, they're fantastic price, but they would do the job, But enjoy being out, though.
We're saying it like it's a big sort of onerous commitment, but actually you've integrated it into your life and you enjoy it, and so it's become worthwhile. But it just shows you the scale of the task and the expenditure that is required to achieve all of this still, doesn't it?
Well, it is expensive. It was something I debated before I bought it because it's quite a big thing. After seeing Aid's footage, I was that burnt up I had to do something. It's good. It's a good camera. It could be better, you could get better sensors. It's all about the Kelvin or something. The lower it is, the better the results are. It's adequate for if you can get near enough. If I could get within 20 yards of it, I would get a really decent picture and you'd know exactly what it was. You wouldn't need the colour.
You can zoom a bit, but if you zoom too much again, you lose the clarity, don't you?
Oh, yeah, it just goes into a fuzzy mess, especially the 12. I don't know why they do it.
In all of this sort of experience, what is the standout characteristics of the cat from you watching it?
It's so inoffensive in some ways, They're frightened of us. They seem gentle in a way, but they're just doing their own thing and they want to be left alone.
It's out, within a couple of miles from various people's houses, yet those people would never know that it was about. It's doing its own thing, keeping its nose clean, keeping out of trouble and behaving itself and wanting a wild existence away from us all.
There is a group of houses and farms, and it's in their gardens.
It's right next to their gardens, isn't it? It's over the wall from their gardens.
And sometimes in the garden.
And they wouldn't even know it.
Well, the dogs do. That's my cue. When I hear the dogs start, I turn around to where the dogs are barking because there's various farms up and down, and I can hear it.
And Aid said the same, didn't he, from Nottinghamshire, actually. I remember he said when it got into the distance on one of the times he filmed it, he could hear the dogs being set off.
Yes, he did. They said 5 houses all at once they set off. Crazy, yeah.
I mean, what I would say about the thermal camera is, okay, it's not giving us the really close-up footage that trail cameras would give us, but trail cameras can't film it for, many, many minutes like you're doing with the thermal camera. So we can see its behaviour, and you're saying it's so inoffensive and, i.e. behaving itself, keeping itself to itself and quietly going about its business. That's what the thermal camera from a distance shows, doesn't it? We are seeing its behaviour.
The 7th video I was watching it for 50 minutes.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, it's very inoffensive.
How many times do you think, Don, it was aware? I know you're quite a distance, but they have got good hearing, and a lot of time it might depend on wind direction as well. But how often do you think it was aware that you were there watching it?
Quite a few times, I think. I don't think it not too bothered. It was just when that sharp click, it upset it. He certainly knew I was there, the first one, when I was shouting at him. And bless he couldn't see me, but he could hear something. And what's that fool doing?
This is unfinished business because, we want to see it closer and clearer and whatever. And I know we'll have you back you've said you'd come back on the podcast if you make more progress with the thermal camera or with trail cameras. So that is absolutely splendid. And we must thank you greatly for, making this contribution to the subject and sharing it with us.
Pleasure.
Is it close-up trail camera footage that you'd like now to get, hopefully in the coming months, if it obliges and stays around?
Oh, yes, I certainly like it. It's a bit of a compulsion now, I think, going out for at least an hour a night, If it's there, then you stay 2 or 3 hours. It'll walk probably 5 or 6 miles or something in the course of the night. And once gone out of sight, where does it go? I have no idea yet. But I did go other places, I go quite a few other places trying to catch up with it, but I haven't been lucky yet.
I mean, it's good that it's been obliged so many times in this one little sort of area in the vicinity of the wall. In fact, you do think there's maybe up to 3, at least 2, because you think one of the ones you've seen is pretty much the same sort of length, but it seems a slighter cat. So maybe a female against a smaller female against a bigger male, or a younger one, a sub-adult or something.
Yeah, I did film one, and it was waiting in the grass. It was a good 200 meters, and it was in the grass, and I thought, it was just a hare, but then it'd stand up now and again. It was quite big, even at that distance, So then eventually one came down the hillside, and it joined it, and they disappeared somewhere. I don't know where. That was interesting.
The fact that there's potentially, at least 2, say, it gives you more of a chance, doesn't it? Seeing it again, seeing one again, and getting on the trail cameras. It must give you hope.
Oh, yes.
Now, we better get on to the final point. What's your attitude to having big cats around in Britain?
This country has been so lacking in apex predators. They keep wanting to rewild it with lynx. Lynx are already here, pretty sure of that. We've got pumas, and we've got leopards, I'm pretty sure, as well as other cats. Far more than we really know. But I think with thermal cameras now, if people could afford to buy some or be loaned some by companies, then you might find that people are finding more. I think it's a good thing for the wildlife. People will just have to get used to it, because at the end of the day, they're here. How do you get rid of them? If you wanted to.
Looking at your landscape, when you went out filming there, first of all, did you think this is an area where a cat's going to turn up, or did you think, I've got to be more on the valley sides where there's woodland?
Yeah, I did start off in the valleys, really, but this was convenient in a way. I went there really for the barn owl and things like that, but it's what I saw as well.
In a way, it is feeding in the way that a barn owl does. The barn owl's going for small voles, isn't it, at that time, and the cat's doing more or less the same at that time.
Yes, exactly. They're taking the same things. I watched the barn owl many times taking mice and rodents. The barn owl would many a time be in the same field as the cat.
Interesting coexistence, yeah. Good stuff, Don. I think we're winding down. It's been so good to go through all these points with you and for you to share this footage, which is going to be so valuable for people to see. Is there anything finally you want to say that we haven't covered?
Listening to Aid's and watching Aid's videos set me off, so that's one of the main things. I've been taking a leaf out of different books, been reading Jonathan McGowan's books, found those very interesting.
Yeah, it just shows you, doesn't it? We're all in it together. I mean, you heard a podcast about using a thermal camera and you got one and you're using one. And now we're seeing the results from you as a fellow listener to the podcast, and you're able to share it with us, and you're reading books by other listeners. And, we are one big sort of community in it together, which is great. And if the podcast can help link us up and help us all learn together, that is terrific. And it's great to have the footage because, we learn from the footage.
Well, it's what you see is what you get. If you work out the scale, you'll find that it is quite a big cat, whether you agree in 40-odd inches or less, even if it's only 3 foot, it's still quite a big cat. And my calculations come about 43 inches long, nose to rump.
Don, I hope we can speak again, whenever it happens, if you get trail camera footage or you get closer thermal footage. So I keep saying it's a great contribution to the subject. So great to have you as a guest. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
Okay, there is quite a bit of footage to see on the website, so hope you find it useful to view all that when you get a chance. It's on the references and links page under episode 84, and near the end of the videos we've included a fox for comparison, and you can see its obvious shape and its different trotting movement. The full moon shown up in the black heat mode of the thermal camera is pretty striking on that fox video. Now, in case some of you haven't got podcast notifications, episode 9 of Missing Panther has recently been released. If you don't know it, it's a really classy production from Australia. You can hear about the parallel panther and puma reports there, and this new episode looks at the situation in Western Australia, with recent witness reports and a further look at the Cordling cougar case in the late 1970s and early 1980s, and that was the basis for the gripping book Savage Shadow, written by the late David O'Reilly. In part of that current Missing Panther episode, there's a very helpful interview with the dog owner, who's still alive, of the scent hound search dog which was used in the Cordling cougar case. That's a nice coincidence because in our next edition here on Big Cat Conversations, we speak to 2 ex-police officers who had big cat sightings in Warwickshire. One was involved in taking and following up big cat reports. The other guest was a police dog handler, and he's currently involved in search dogs in his retirement. He discusses the potential for using tracking dogs and scat detection dogs for big cat follow-up work here in Britain. So that's all coming up in episode 85 next time. OK, time to sign out now. So thank you again to our guest Don, and thanks to Owen for his behind-the-scenes work on our audio production and all the website content. Righto, thanks for listening everyone. Take care, and bye for now.